Okay, I see you within the Jumbotron.
Trying to get I don't have the PDF in there though. What's
I
up,
got you.
Damien? Hold on, let me get you a mic, bro. You already feeling better?
About to cook some chicken too, so
Well, shit, listen to us while you resting.
yeah, that's definitely gonna do that.
Sure, I'm glad you're here.
I start cooking
Now,
me some food. I'm hungry.
no, that's right. Let me find the PDF so I can pick up where we left off. Oh, okay. So we're on 26. Um, choose, did you want to split it or how did you?
Yeah. You want me to start or you want to start?
I'll go ahead and start, and every 2 pages is good.
That's perfect.
Cool. All right. So I'll start with the quote from Bobby Seale, Seize the Time. We knew before Huey's trial began in mid-July that the whole power structure wanted to hang Huey. Ooh, right quick. I need a favor. Let me look at my DM. Someone told me to ping them because they wanted to make sure that they came, and I said I would. Hold on, let me get their name.
I'm gonna share the space too, but
Appreciate it. Let me find them because I definitely said I would. It wasn't awesome. It was, yo, this is a lot of DMs. Damn, I'm gonna just have to ask for forgiveness because that's too many DMs to look through. But it's recorded, so I'll send them the recording. All right, so the quote is from Bobby Seale, Seize the Time. It says, we knew before Huey's trial began in mid-July that the whole power structure wanted to hang Huey. We understood that William Nolan, the publisher of the Oakland Tribune, the mayor, the other politicians, the DA, and the cops were all so treacherous that they would do anything to get a conviction and send Huey to the gas chamber. We asked Charles Gary a number of times what he thought would happen. He would run it down. How Huey was really innocent, and how the two cops had shot each other in an attempt to kill Huey. Again, that's a quote from Bobby Seale, Seize the Time. Trial. The morning my trial began on July 15th, 1968, in the Alameda County Courthouse. 5,000 demonstrators and about 450 Black Panthers gathered outside to show their support. Busloads of demonstrators came from out of town and joined the throng that crowded the streets and sidewalks outside the courthouse. Across the street from the building, a formation of Black Panthers stood, lined up 2 deep and stretching for a solid block. At the entrance to the building, a unit of sisters from the party chanted, "Free Huey," and "Set our warrior free," in front of them. On both sides of the courthouse door, 2 party members held aloft the blue Black Panther banner with "Free Huey" embezzled on it. Black Panther security patrols with walkie-talkies, radio sets ringed the courthouse. The building was under heavy guard. At every entrance and patrolling every floor, armed deputies from the sheriff's office prowled up and down, and plainclothes men were assigned positions throughout the building. On that first day, nearly 50 helmeted Oakland police stood inside the main entrance, and on the rooftop, more cops with high-powered rifles stared down into the street. The trial was conducted in the 7th-floor courtroom, a small, depressing room kept ice cold throughout the trial. Security was so tight that the courtroom was carefully inspected before every session. Everyone, even my parents, was searched before entering. The spectator section had only about 60 seats. 2 rooms were reserved for my family. The press had 25 or so seats, and the rest was for general public. Every morning, around dawn, people began lining up outside for the few remaining places. Presiding was Superior Court Judge Monroe Friedman, 72 years old, dour and humorless. Of course, no one admits prejudice, but Judge Friedman betrayed his in court in countless ways throughout the trial. Clearly, from the beginning, he thought I was guilty, and his sympathies lie with the prosecution. For one thing, he condescended to Black witnesses, speaking to them as if they were not capable of understanding the issues. It was obvious that he was totally unaware of the development of Black consciousness in the past decade. Even his tone of voice was revealing. As the trial progressed, he constantly overruled my lawyer and sustained almost every objection of the prosecutor. Sometimes, when he did not like the way things were going, he looked over to the prosecutor's table as if inviting an objection, which he would then sustain. On interpretation, he was extremely rigid. Whenever a legal point could not be solved by legal mechanics, he would pass it off as unimportant, thereby leaving it for some higher court to deal with or for some political statement to be made through the legislator. Nothing was considered that was not in the book. He acknowledged that some laws were good and reluctantly followed those he disliked. Never for one moment did I consider him a fair arbiter. The most crucial aspect of the trial was the jury selection, and on the first trial day, several hundred prospective jurors came to the courthouse. Charles Gary wanted a certain kind of juror, and he faced terrific odds in finding him. For one thing, everyone in the Oakland area had read or seen prejudicial accounts of the shooting. It was difficult to find anyone without an opinion about the case. Then, too, we wanted some black people. This was a vital issue, and as we learned through our investigations, a formidable hurdle to overcome.
Our injuries revealed that the assistant district attorney and a prosecutor in my trial, Will Jensen, had developed a system whereby blacks would ostensibly be on jury panels called for duty, but would always be eliminated before they were seated in an actual trial. Under Jensen's direction, whenever a black was a black was removed from the prospective jury for cause or through preemptory challenges, he was always returned to the jury panel and called in another trial. That way, it always appeared the blacks were an active part of the system, even though it was unlikely a black would ever serve in an actual jury. When my trial began, the routine changed. Other district attorneys in the area did not remove blacks from their jury panels. Therefore, while my trial was in session, there were other juries in other courts with as many as 6 blacks on them. The party instructed Gary to use all his preemptory challenges on prospective jurors. In a capital case in the state of California, each side is allowed 20. That is, both defense and prosecution can reject 20 jurors without giving a reason. We gave Gary these instructions to demonstrate to the people that something is wrong with the trial system that defiles the right of a defendant to be tried by a true cross-section of his community. We used all our preemptory challenges to emphasize this point. The prosecution did not exhaust all of theirs, since it was not hard for them to find their kind of people. Charles Gary found racism in almost every prospective juror he questioned. Selecting the jury took a long time, about 2 weeks. All in all, 3 panels of prospective jurors, about 180 people, were questioned before a jury, and 4 alternatives were chosen. Out of the nearly 200 people available for my jury, there were 16 blacks, a few Orientals, or 1 or 2 Chicanos. The population of Oakland was then about 38% black. The final jury consisted of 11 whites and 1 black. The black man, David Harper, actually looked enough like me to pass as a relative, although we were strangers before the trial. At that time, he was an executive in a branch of the Bank of America, but he has since become the president of a black bank in Detroit. Oh, God. I wonder why the district attorney did not excuse him for serving. Do we have to really wonder? Anyway, um, perhaps he figured it would help his cause in appeals court to have at least 1 black on the jury. Child. Oh, also, he had tried to get a safe one. Wake it up. I figured that the district attorney saw Harper as a quote unquote house nigger, a black bank official who quote unquote had it made, so to speak. They probably thought Harper could be counted on because of his status and his ambition to go further in the white world. Throughout the trial, I studied Harper, trying to get a measure of the man. Would he go along with the badness of the system? With a jury, it was always a guessing game. You know the judge and the prosecutor are your enemies and will do anything to keep you down. Every other paid employee in the courtroom, regardless of color, is a slave to the system. But the jurors are something else. I watched every move Harper made, yet I could not detect where he was or where he was going. I began to wonder if the fact that he had a good job in a bank gave him satisfaction. I asked myself whether he was so blinded by the crumbs the system offered him that he would go along with the racists on the jury and a corrupt state apparatus to secure his future, or what he had hoped might be his future. These questions went through my mind almost daily as the proceedings crept along. Sometimes, pondering Harper, I found myself paying no attention at all to the boring testimony of the prosecution's witnesses, such as ballistic experts. Not until I saw and until I took the stand myself and began talking to the jury did I feel Harper knew his friends better than the district attorney had estimated. When I finally testified, I directed my words to Harper. He was my audience. An unspoken bond grew between us that convinced me he not only understood, but he also agreed with me. Shout out to you, Harper. Only then did I see a glimmer of hope with the jury. He was it. However, I never placed much confidence in his ability to sway the others. The prosecutor in my case was Lowell Jensen, who later became the district attorney of Alameda County. Jensen is a witty and intelligent man and a worthy opponent as far as the law is concerned. He appears to have a photographic memory, and on the basis of legal knowledge alone, he is a good lawyer. In my case, he meant to get a conviction of first-degree murder, no matter how far he had to stretch the law, and to that end, he ignored the possibility that there were a number of grounds for reversal, and in that time, a higher court would decide against the verdict of this trial. A conviction was all he cared about.
I can take it from here.
Period.
He knew that if he won his case against me, a person hated by the establishment, he would be regarded with fame and rising fortune. What would a reversal matter? A ruling by a higher court would take from 2 to 5 years, and by that time, he would have achieved what he wanted. My trial was nothing more than an ego trip for him. Throughout the trial, an unspoken game or challenge went on in the courtroom between Jensen, the judge, and myself, although a lot of people, especially the jury, knew nothing about it. The jury probably believed that the prosecutor and the judge were honorable men, with only their jobs and justice on their mind. But my lawyers and I understood the undercurrents and intangibles that were always present, difficult as they were to expose. And we knew that if the jury were aware of them, also they would see the political nature of much that went on in the courtroom. For example, when we surmised from the very start of the trial that Jensen had engineered the racist system by which blacks would be on jury panels called for duty but eliminated before they could be seated for trial. And we knew that Jensen did not have justice on his mind, but wanted victory at any cost to further his own personal ambitions. These were some of the things that made the whole trial seem like a grim game with my life at stake, but a game nonetheless. In his opening statements to the jury, Jensen charged that I had murdered Officer John Fry with full intent, that I had shot Officer Herbert Hines, and that I had kidnapped Del Ross. He said that when the first policeman stopped me, I had given him false identification, but when the second officer came up, I had correctly identified myself. Then the first officer, Fry, placed me under arrest. He claimed that when the police officer walked me back to his car, I produced a gun and began firing. According to Jensen, I shot Officer Fry with my own gun, which I pulled from inside my shirt, then took his gun and continued shooting. I was charged with shooting Officer Fry 5 times and Officer Hines 3 times. Officer Hines was supposed to have shot me once. After this, the prosecutor said I escaped and forced Del Ross to take me to another part of Oakland. The most crucial challenge facing the prosecution was to establish motivation for my alleged actions. Jensen claimed that I had 3 motives for my alleged crimes. First, he said I had had a prior conviction for a felony and was on probation. Because of this, I knew that having a concealed weapon on my person could lead to another felony conviction if the police officers found the gun on me. Second, they claimed that I had marijuana in the car and that bits of marijuana had been found in the pockets of my pants. This too could lead to another felony beef. And third, they claimed that I had given false identification to the police officer, which was a violation of the law. For these reasons, the prosecutor claimed I was so desperate to escape another felony charge that I killed an officer, wounded another, and kidnapped a citizen. As I said before, the prosecutor was willing to go to any lengths to win his case. The truth of the matter is that when Fry stopped me, he knew full well who I was, as did every other policeman on the Oakland force, and he had tried to execute me in an urban variation of the old-style Southern lynching. My attorneys had investigated Fry's background, and they found a long history of harassing and mistreating Black people and making racist statements about Blacks and to Blacks. Unfortunately for Fry, his habits boomeranged that time. I do not know what happened because I was unconscious, but things did not work out as he wanted or expected them to. I guess he thought that if he could bring me in dead, he would be given a promotion. The marijuana charge was sheer fabrication. First of all, no member of the Black Panther Party uses drugs. You know what? Anyway.
Sir! I'm sorry. Sorry, niggas is just lying. Like, but okay.
Damn, I lost my place. Okay, there we go. Anyone discovered violating this rule is expelled from the party. Narcotics prohibition is part of the Black Panther principle of obeying the law to the letter. Both Charles Gary and I believe that the marijuana found in the car and in my trousers was planted there by the police. Having been stopped by members of the Oakland Police Force more than 50 times in the past year, why would I take the risk? Knowing that at any moment of the day or night, I was liable to be thoroughly searched and my car inspected. I would never have been reckless enough to carry marijuana, even if I had to use it, which I don't. If the matchboxes really were in Laverne's car that night, there is no way of knowing how they got there. Dozens of people used her car, many of whom she knew only slightly since they were friends of friends. But it is far more likely that the police were behaving as usual, leaving out no possibility in their determination to railroad me to jail.
As for being a felon with a gun, I, of course, was not carrying a weapon but had been out celebrating the end of my probation that night. There was no reason for me to have a gun and no reason to avoid arrest on this count, nor did I consider myself a felon. The original conviction of felony was a complicated one anyway, going back to the Odell Lee case in 1964. Under California law, the sentence a defendant receives determines whether he is a felon or a misdemeanant. If he is sentenced to a state prison, he is a felon. A misdemeanant usually goes to a county jail. When I was convicted of assaulting Odell Lee with a deadly weapon, I was sentenced to 3 years probation, a condition being that I served 6 months in the county jail. This meant I was a misdemeanant. However, in my murder trial, the judge testified that I had been sentenced to state prison and that the sentence had been suspended. As a condition of my probation, I spent 6 months in the county jail. Technically, the state considered me a felon. In the end, this proved to be a reversible error. Although I could have changed my legal status in the courts, I never petitioned because I did not consider myself a felon. But the prosecution did and planned its whole case around the point. Not only did they want to show that I would commit murder to avoid arrest, they also wanted to take advantage of the fact that a felon's testimony can be discredited and he can receive a severer sentence. Despite Charles Gary's objections and arguments, Judge Friedman's ruled that I had been convicted of a felony in 1964, and this charge against me was added to the other 3. This question of the Odell Lee conviction came up repeatedly during the trial, since the prosecution needed to establish a motive. Eventually, when I testified, I told the jury again that I had not considered myself a felon. It was actually a ridiculous basis for motivation since I had dozens of witnesses who saw me out celebrating on the night of October 27th, a fact which proved beyond a doubt that I had no reason to resist arrest as a felon. When my trial was just beginning, Eldridge Cleaver put out a leaflet that was widely distributed to the Black community. In it, he charged that the police, with murder on their minds, had violated the territorial integrity of the Black community and that I had dealt with this transgression in a necessary way. The leaflet went on to say that Black people are justified in killing all policemen who do this. Wake it up. Beyond Eldridge's cleavage message lay the inference that I had killed the police officer, even though I had not. Oh, wait, hold up. So he was dry snitching. Okay. The leaflet could have not been used against me in the courts. Even so, my family was very upset over it, as they should, and they protested strongly to Eldridge. They felt he cared little about me and that he was, in effect, trying to gas me. I told them as gently as I could not to interfere with anything Eldridge or other party members did during the trial because such actions could not be brought into the legal proceedings. As far as I was concerned, Eldridge was free to write and mobilize the community by any means necessary. I supported him in that. Issuing the leaflet was a political act using the trial to heighten the consciousness of the community. I was willing to go along with party actions in the interest of educating the people, mobilizing the community, and taking the contradictions to a higher level. After that, my family did not interfere with political activities. The trial caused much grief and worry to my family. They wanted to save me, but I felt death was ahead, and my main concern was the community. Because my family continued to hope, I could not tell them this, however, and I was very moved by their faith and support. In fact, the only strain I felt during the trial was the pull between trying to comfort my family and carrying out the political activities I knew were necessary. It has all worked out for the best now, but at the time, it was a tremendous weight on my family and on me. Another matter of concern was whether to reveal to my attorneys the name of Gene McKinney, my passenger on the night of the incident. My passenger on the night the incident went down. Gene had never been apprehended by the police, despite a diligent search. What is more, they did not even know his name. From the start, the police had cleared Gene, and Haynes had testified before the grand jury that my companion had not taken a part in any violence. Right after I was captured, the police sent broadcasts all through California saying they had apprehended the guilty party and they wanted the passenger to come in for questioning. They repeatedly said in these broadcasts that the passenger had nothing to do with the incident.
Mm.
Is
Mm-mm.
this my 2 pages?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Damn. Now
Check.
you did a good job. I was suspected that they wanted to use him against me, and at first I refused to give his name to my attorneys. I saw no point in involving Gene, even though I knew his testimony might help free me. Only when my lawyers had convinced me that legally the prosecution could not do anything to him did I agree to reveal Gene's identity. From my own knowledge of the law, I became aware that the courts were powerless to hurt him. However, Gene was skeptical. When my lawyers finally met him, they explained very carefully that he could not be hurt by testifying for the defense, and he did eventually testify despite his doubts. This showed supreme courage on his part because the prosecutors were not above pulling some trick to involve him. The prosecution took about 3 weeks to present its case and called about 20 witnesses to the stand. They included people like the nurse who had admitted me at Kaiser Hospital, the doctor who did the autopsy on Officer Fry, ballistic experts from the police department, various policemen who arrived at the scene of the shooting, and so on. But three most important witnesses were Patrolman Haynes, Henry Grier, and bus driver who allegedly witnessed the shooting, and Del Ross, who claimed that McKinney and I had kidnapped him. The first of these to testify were Herbert Hines. When Officer Hines took the witness stand, it soon became apparent that he was a very disturbed man. He told of reoccurring dreams in which the Black Panthers were attacking him. Haynes is not very bright, and as time again, he had trouble keeping his story straight. The impression grew that he was completely confused. The prosecutor had obviously rehearsed him, but Haynes was so tense that he made mistakes. With each mistake, he dropped his head as if to say, "I'll try the script over again." He was no good at all at improvisation and reconciling contradictions in his testimony. Haynes testified that after Frey ordered me out of the car, the two of us walked to Haynes' patrol car, parked behind Laverne's Volkswagen, while he, Haynes, remained near the front of the door of Fry's patrol car, about 35 feet away from us. As Fry and I reached the rear of Haynes' car, Haynes testified that I turned around and started shooting, and that Fry and I then started tussle on the trunk of his car. At this point, Hines said he was shot in the right arm, whereupon he switched his gun to his left hand. Immediately after this, he noticed out of the corner of his eye that the passenger in my car, McKinney, had gotten out of the Volkswagen and was standing on the curb with his arms up in the air. Hines turned his gun on him, but after the passenger assured him he was not armed, Hines turned back to Fry and me. By this time, Hines said, Fry and I had separated, although Fry was still hanging on to me, and he, Hines, shot at my stomach as I faced him. He did not say that he saw his bullet hit me, only that he fired at my midsection. After that, Hines said he remembered only two things. First, sending out a 945B, the police emergency number, over the police radio, and second, seeing two men run into the darkness. When Gary cross-examined Haynes after his testimony, many contradictions had unanswered questions emerged. Haynes repeatedly stated that he never saw a gun in my hand, yet he testified that I had turned around and started to shoot. He was never able to say who had shot him in the arm, although when he shot me in the stomach, he said I was facing him. He would not state that I had shot him, even though as a police officer, he is supposedly trained to observe such facts as whether or not a suspect has a gun. He was confused in his descriptions of that McKinney was wearing. Some of his testimony contradicted the description given later by Henry Greer, the bus driver. Perhaps the greatest weakness of his testimony, which Gary skillfully brought to the jury's attention, was that Haynes had turned his back on McKinney, having only McKinney's word that he was unarmed. Since the Oakland police distrusted and hated all Black Panthers, and since McKinney, who was unknown to Haynes and who was riding with the Black Panther Minister of Defense, could very well have been a Black Panther, why had he let himself unprotected, particularly since he said he did not know where all the shots were coming from? As Gary suggested in his cross-examination of Haynes, it was probably because Haynes was more worried about what Fry would do. Among the police, Fry was known to need watching in the Black community. He was even worse than the normal cop, which made him extremely dangerous.
It was clear from Hines' testimony that the way he had been coached by the prosecutor, that great pains had been taken to avoid any implication that Frey and Hines had shot each other. Charles Gary's first question on cross-examination dealt with this. Did you shoot and kill Officer Frey? Haynes said no. Yet several facts pointed that way, and Haynes' evasions were not helpful to the prosecution. For instance, Haynes made a point of saying that he fired at me only when Frey and I had broken apart after a struggle on the car. A more damaging piece of evidence came from the ballistics section of the police department itself. The expert who had testified concluded that the bullets that hit both Frey and Haynes came from police revolver. Goddamn. Okay. They were lead bullets, not copper jacketed, as were the two 9mm casings found on the ground at the scene of the shooting. This damaged the prosecution's case because Jensen had maintained from the beginning that I had shot Haynes and Frey with my own 38mm pistol, whose bullets would have been matched to the 9mm casings found on the ground. Of course, this mythical gun was never found. All in all, Haynes' testimony did little for the prosecution. He became even more muddled during my second trial, and by the time he appeared at the third trial, he found it impossible to deal with his own inconsistencies. It was then he broke down on the stand and admitted seeing a third party at the scene of the shooting. Jesus Christ! But even at my first trial, his testimony was too vague and inconsistent to be taken seriously. Ain't it crazy how people who think they're the master race really just be so fucking mediocre? Child, master race where? Anyway. The testimony of Henry Greer, a Black man, was the next major witness for the prosecution and was therefore all important. He was the only person besides Haynes who had claimed I had a gun at the scene of the shooting. Greer was a bus driver for the Alameda Contra Costa transit system in Oakland. According to his testimony, he had been driving his bus along 7th Street shortly after 5 a.m. on the morning of October 28, 1967, when he stopped his vehicle and under its bright lights witnessed the shooting of Frey and Haynes from the distance of about 10 feet or less. Asked by Jensen to identify the gunsman, Greer left the stand, walked over to where I sat with my attorneys, and put his hand on my shoulder.
When he testified for the first time on the afternoon of August 7th, 1968, a feeling of disgust for him overwhelmed me. He was obviously a bought man who had sold out from terror of the white power structure, and perhaps because the district attorney had promised him a few handouts. My attorneys also had reason to suspect, after investigation, that he was in some kind of trouble with his job or the law, and only by cooperating with the district attorney could he get out of his predicament. Yet, as the first trial wore on, my feelings of disgust turned to pity. He was, after all, a brother. As a Black, sorry, that's not funny. As a Black, I understood that he was coerced into selling his integrity for survival, and I knew he must have been disgusting to himself. After the first trial, I thought Greer would not be able to live with himself, but when he came back and did it twice again, in the second and third trials, I realized he had been totally destroyed as a person, too corrupt even to feel shame. He was a complete mystery to me. It is an indication of Greer's importance to the prosecution that Charles Gary learned of his existence only on August 1st, 6 days before he appeared on the witness stand. On August 1st, jury selection had been completed, and under the rules of the court, the prosecution was required to give the defense the names and addresses of all the witnesses it intended to call during the trial. It was on this day that Gary first saw Greer's name and learned who he was. During the entire 9 months of preparation for the trial, Jensen had seen to it that Greer was kept completely out of sight and never mentioned. He did not appear before the grand jury. In all the police reports and in all the official statements that were issued covering every detail of the incident, the name of the most important witness, in quotes, to the shooting was withheld. Jensen had carried out his Machiavellian tactics with supreme cunning. Only when it was no longer possible to hide Greer did Gary learn of his identity and that he claimed to have witnessed the incident. At the time my lawyers received the prosecution list with Greer's name on it, they were also given another staggering piece of evidence, a transcript of a recorded conversation between Greer and Police Inspector Frank McConnell, which took place at the Oakland Police Station only 90 minutes after the shooting on October 28th. The police had brought Greer to the station house for a statement almost immediately after the incident, and in it he described everything he had allegedly seen. He also identified me as the gunman from a photograph in the police files that Inspector McConnell showed him. When my attorneys read Greer's statement given to the police while everything was still fresh in his mind, we learned why the police and prosecution had hidden him away. If Charles Gary had had a chance to talk to him earlier, he would have convinced Greer in a very short time that his eyewitness account of the shooting would never stand up in court. First of all, Greer did not make a statement to the police. His interview at the police station was a classic case of verbal entrapment. The inspector led Greer, who was not only weak, but also in many instances unsure of everything he had seen, and fed him the questions that would produce answers the police wanted. Whenever Greer hesitated or stopped while trying to remember what he had seen, Inspector McConnell put words in his mouth or suggested the way things had happened. Then Greer would agree. But serious as this was, some of Greer's most crucial statements were so damaging to the prosecution's case, it seems incredible that Jensen was willing to gamble everything on him as a principal witness. The fact that Greer swore I had a gun in my hand must have affected Jensen's judgment concerning the rest of Greer's testimony. First, in describing the gunman, whom he later identified as me, Greer said he was no taller than 5 feet. Short of a peewee type, you might call him, were his exact words to Inspector McConnell. Since I'm 5'10.5" you better tell him. Greer's impression of my height, tan jacket, and that I was clean shaven. The police had kept all the clothing I was wearing that night, and it was a matter of record that I wore a black jacket, a white shirt, and 2 weeks' growth of beard. You better let him know. This was confirmed by a close-up photograph taken by the police when I was lying on the gurney of Kaiser Hospital. Huey said his beard connects, okay? You better respect it. Then too many of the things Greer said in the transcript were at variance with Officer Hines' depiction of what took place. Greer told Inspector McConnell that he had first come upon the scene while driving his bus westbound on 7th Street. As he approached Willow Avenue on 7th, directly across from the construction site of a new post office, he said he observed 2 parked police cars and near them 2 policemen and 2 civilians standing in the street. Oh, is it still my turn?
No, I just lost my case. I'm so sorry.
No, you're good. It was Greer's impression. The second sentence on page 232.
I don't know how I just fast forwarded.
Do you want me to read till you catch up?
Yeah,
I
okay.
got you. I got you. All right. It was Greer's impression that the police were probably giving the 2 civilians a ticket or making a routine check, and so he thought little of it as he continued west to the end of his run.
I got it.
Okay.
This contradicted the testimony of Haynes, who said that the second passenger, McKinney, had remained in the Volkswagen until Haynes, was shot. Greer related how he went to the end of his route, turned around, and began his eastbound run back along 7th Street, picking up 3 passengers on the way. When he got back to where the police cars were, he said he arrived at the moment where Frey and I were walking towards one of the police cars, with Officer Haynes walking behind us. Haynes had testified that he stayed beside Frey's car as we walked towards the other police car and had not accompanied us. At this point, Greer said, while Frey was walking beside me, I reached into my jacket, pulled out a gun, and fired at Haynes, who was walking behind me. Haynes fell to the ground. By this time, Greer told McConnell that he had stopped the bus about 30 or 40 yards away from us. Then, he continued, Frey and I began wrestling, and he heard a second shot. He reached for the phone in his bus to call Central Dispatch of the transit system, and when he looked again, Frey had fallen on his back, and I was standing over him, firing 3 or 4 more shots at him while he lay on his back on the ground. The next thing he knew, said Greer, I had turned and fled west, and within minutes, people and police were arriving at the scene from every direction. He told Inspector McConnell that he had not seen the second civilian after he first passed the 4 of us on his eastbound trip. During the shooting, the man was nowhere to be seen, according to Greer's testimony. Haynes had testified that McKinney was standing near the curb with his hands in the air. As soon as Gary and my other attorneys read this transcript and received Greer's name and address on August 1st, they tried to get in touch with him. He did not appear at work for the next 6 days. They called his home over and over again but could not reach him. A recorded message said the number was out of order. For 6 days, a constant vigil was maintained outside his home. No one was there, and neither he or any family member of his could be found. Greer had simply disappeared. None of my lawyers laid eyes on Henry Greer until he walked into the courtroom on August 7th to testify for the prosecution. On the afternoon his name had been given to the defense, Greer had been taken into protective custody by the district attorney's office and secretly installed in the Lake Marriott Hotel in downtown Oakland, completely unavailable for questioning by the defense. When Greer finally appeared, Gary had only a matter of hours to prepare his cross-examination on the basis of prosecution testimony. However, he had 6 days to go over Greer's sworn statement to Inspector McConnell, enough time to discredit totally Greer's statements on the witness stand, because, unbelievably, Greer changed a lot of his earlier testimony under questioning by Jensen. At this point, the jury had not read the transcript of Greer's sworn statement to Inspector McConnell. And so, when Jensen put Greer on the stand on August 7th, the jurors were hearing for the first time Greer's account of the shooting. Jensen handled his testimony very slickly, emphasizing particularly that part in which Greer said, I pulled a gun from inside my shirt, shot at Haynes, and then shot and killed Frey, standing over him and firing 3 or 4 more shots into his body. When Greer walked over and identified me, the jury must have been convinced of my guilt, for Greer was a calm, assured witness. But Jensen made a crucial mistake. He thought he could get away with the inconsistencies between Greer's statements, made an hour and a half after the shooting and when Jensen coached him to say on the stand. He had Greer tell the jury that he was less than 10 feet away from the participants in the shooting, whereas in his sworn statement to McConnell, Greer had said he was 30 or 40 yards away. And he told the jury in the courtroom that I had reached into my shirt for the gun. What kind of shirt was that? But in his original statement, he said that I had reached into the pocket of my jacket or coat to get it. Greer testified during the trial that Frey fell forward, face down, while he had claimed that McConnell that he had fell on his back. You would not forget the way somebody fell if you just watched them die, but okay. On the stand, Greer claimed that the bus lights were shining directly on the scene and he could see plainly, but he had told McConnell that he could not tell how old the gunman was because he had his head down and he couldn't get a good look. He told Jensen on the stand that I had fled towards the post office construction site, but when McConnell had asked him if that was where I was headed where he last seen me, Greer said no, that I was running northwest towards a gas station.
Yeah, yo, they didn't even try. Like, goddamn.
Mm-mm.
It took only about 3.5 hours of cross-examination for Charles Gary to demolish Greer's credibility. In his examination of him and in his final summation, Gary showed that there were at least 15 crucial statements in which Greer's 2 sworn testimonies were in conflict. For a while, Gary said to the jury near the end of the trial, I thought Mr. Greer was making an honest mistake. I really thought that for a long time But I've now come to the conclusion that this man was either deliberately lying or that he is a psychopath and that he can't be depended upon in relating any kind of facts. As far as Huey Newton is concerned, either choice is deadly. No, that's right. In his cross-examination of Greer, Gary first demonstrated that there had been absolutely no reason for his having been taken to protective custody. Over the strenuous objections of Jensen, who constantly leaped up and called Gary's questions incompetent, irrelevant, and impartial, Gary got Greer to admit that not only had the district attorney's office never told him why he was being taken into custody, but also that Greer himself had always felt perfectly safe and had never been threatened and had never felt a need for any protection. This was an effective beginning because it showed the jury that the trial was being conducted by a ruthless prosecutor who had denied the defense lawyers their legal right to question a prospective witness. Then Gary proceeded to develop his masterly strategy to expose Greer's fraudulence. He had him describe all over again, in the same words, the story he had told the jury for the prosecution. Gary wanted the jury to understand very clearly what was happening. The jury was still unaware of Greer's first statement to McConnell. When Greer had finished, Gary took off. He demonstrated in one instance after another all the discrepancies in Greer's two stories. This is how his cross-examination went on point. Gary,
Do you
how was
want
the...
to? Do you want to read
Yeah,
it?
let's do it. Let's do
So
it.
y'all, this is like a script. Who do you want to be? Do you want to be Gary or Greer?
I'm be Greer. No, you be Greer because you're gonna wild out. So I'm be
No, I'm
Gary.
not. No, 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 no. You be wild out.
Baby, you got it. I know you ready.
I'm
This
screaming.
is, this is
Okay.
your turn. Okay, so Gary, oh my bad. How was the civilian dressed?
Well, sir, he had on a dark jacket and a light shirt.
As a matter of fact, sir, didn't the civilian have on a dark shirt and a light tan jacket?
No, sir.
I want you to think about this before you answer it. I'm going to ask you again. Isn't it a fact that the person you have described as a civilian was a person who had on a dark shirt on, a black shirt on, and a light tan jacket?
Silence.
A light tan jacket?
No, sir. It was dark.
Oh, the judge. What was the answer?
Dark.
Freeman, dark what?
The outer garment was dark.
How tall was the civilian?
From up in the coach, sir, to look down at an angle like that, I wouldn't dare say, sir.
Isn't it a fact that that civilian was under 5 feet?
I do not know, sir.
Well, would you say that the civilian was heavyset, thin, or otherwise?
I didn't pay close attention, counselor.
Mr. Greer, you know that you are under oath, do you not?
I do, sir. I do.
Jensen, object to this as being argumentative, Your Honor. Oh, that's me. Mr. Greer, you made a statement to Inspector McConnell on the 28th day of October in 1967 at the hour of 6:30 a.m.?
That's right, sir.
And in that statement, didn't you tell Inspector McConnell that the person that was involved was under 5 feet?
I could have, sir.
Did you or did you not say so?
I don't recall making any specific statement, sir, as to that fact, sir. Sorry, continue now.
At this point, the court adjourned for the day. Next morning, Thursday, August 8th, in the absence of the jury, Gary made two motions for a mistrial. The first was based on the evidence that the prosecution had hidden a witness from the defense. We found out the first time yesterday, said Gary to Judge Freeman, that immediately after these documents were given to us and the list of the witnesses, that the prosecution immediately took this man out of the circulation to a point where we did not know where he was under the guise of so-called protective custody. I think it's your turn, or is it mine still?
No, it's me. He was put into the hotel Marriott, and we didn't find out until he was on the stand yesterday afternoon. Our motion is based upon the grounds that the prosecution has gone out of its way to circumvent the right and obligation and duty of defense to prepare its case and present it in a serious case as this one is. I feel hamstrung. I feel tied up, and I'm asking the court for release. Jensen immediately responded that if Gary had wanted to talk to any witness, he should have come to the district attorney's office the following day and talked to him there. Quote, this is from the Gary. I have the right to see witnesses under my own circumstances and my own conditions. I spent hours and hours of investigation trying to locate this man, and all that time he had him under wraps, Gary replied. And then he went on to present his second motion for the mistrial. This is the second motion, quote. My second motion is based upon the atmosphere of the courthouse. I feel impelled to call to the court's attention that the entire courthouse, as you walk in through the front door, is permeated and surrounded by deputies of the Alameda County Sheriff's Department and other police agencies, making it embarrassing and insulting, and has, in my opinion, a direct bearing and effect on the jury itself. In this particular case, under these circumstances, I feel impelled to call to the court's attention that we don't feel that we can get a fair trial with a jury walking around these same doors with bailiffs finding out who they are and what they are doing in the same building, and this kind of atmosphere. And for the same reason, I am going to renew a motion for mistrial. Judge Freeman, motion denied. Bring the jury down. With that, the jury returned, and Gary resumed his cross-examination of Henry Greer. Gary. Is this more?
Yeah, it's another script.
Period. Go ahead, Gary.
Mr. Greer, isn't it a fact that you first saw this officer and this civilian walking alongside each other, as you have described it, when your bus was at least 30 to 45 yards from the scene?
I did not, sir.
Oh, let me read this script right quick. And then I noticed, as I approached, I saw the officer walking, one guy towards the second patrol car, and this guy was short of a small-built fellow. Just as I approached within 30 to 40 yards of it, I noticed the man begins going into his jacket. You gave that answer to Inspector McConnell on the hour of the morning, did you not, sir?
I did, sir.
Mr. Greer, this man was under 5 feet, isn't that right? Would you answer that question either yes or no?
I don't know, counselor.
Now I gotta read from the script again. Q. How tall would you say he was? Answer. No more 5 feet. Q. Very short. A. Very short. You gave that answer, did you not, at the time?
I did.
Mr. Gary, how much did this man weigh?
I don't know.
In your estimation.
I don't know, counselor.
I gotta read from the script. How about how much would you say he weighed? Answer. 125. Did you give that answer to that question?
I could have, counselor.
Was this man that you saw on the morning, was this fellow a husky fellow or a thin person or a medium person or what?
Medium, I would say.
As a matter of fact, the person you have described was a little pee-wee fellow. Isn't that right?
He was not, sir.
Reading from the script. Q. Was he heavy? Husky. Answer. No. Q. Slender. A. Answer. Sort of pee-wee type fellow, you might call him. Isn't that right? That is what you said.
I could have, counselor.
That is what you did say, isn't it, sir?
Possibility, yes. I could have said that, yes, sir.
Oh, not possibility. That is exactly what you did say, isn't it, sir?
As I said before, counselor, without any mistake, I could have.
It was the truth, wasn't it, sir?
It was, sir. Shout out to your acting. Pen and paper.
Yo, give it to me.
I'm gonna keep reading. After this, who knew we were thespians anyway? I thought we were just
Oh, I
fucking.
thought you were gonna say lesbians. You
I
knew.
didn't know we were thespian lesbians, but okay. Oh child. After this, and while Jensen registered his disapproval, Gary read to the jury the entire transcript of Greer's statement to the Inspector McConnell. There could be no question in the jurors' minds that something was suspicious, if not rotten, about the prosecution's star witness. Gary's most dramatic refutation of Greer's testimony, and the one that went to the heart of the matter, came before his final summary for the defense. He walked over to the table in the courtroom where all the evidence for the trial was on display and picked up a blank a black leather jacket that I had been wearing on October 28th. He then picked up Haynes' .38 revolver and walked over to the jury box. Standing before the jurors, he quoted Greer's original statement that I had gone into my jacket or coat pocket and pulled out a gun. The gun in the prosecution claim I had hidden, a .38 pistol, could have not been much smaller than Haynes' revolver, Gary said. As he put the gun in the jacket pocket, it immediately fell out. If the gun do not fit,
Mm.
you must acquit. He put it into the other pocket and it fell out again. He tried putting the gun in the pocket several times and each time it fell out. The pocket was too small to hold it. He reminded the jury again of Greer's statements. And if this isn't a diabolical lie, he said, I don't know what. He said, if this isn't a diabolical lie, he said, then I don't know what a lie is. That's the reason he hasn't changed it. That's the reason he changed it from his coat to his shirt. Could it be doctored in any more fashionable way? Try it. This is a shallow pocket. It
It
was
was about, oh, my bad.
okay. No, that
No, is that your second page?
I think so.
Oh, my fault. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it was my second page. It's your turn.
Oh, it's about 3.5 inches deep. Sorry, I'm childish. That's why his testimony was changed. And it was changed with the condemnation and the knowledge of the prosecution in this case to get a conviction. On Monday morning, August 12th, Del Ross, accompanied by his own lawyer, arrived at court to testify for the prosecution. At this point, Jensen needed him desperately. The first two major witnesses, Haynes and Greer, had not been as strong as he had hoped. Ross was his last chance. Del Ross had testified before the grand jury in November 1967 that right after the shooting, I had jumped into his car with another man and forced him at gunpoint to flee the scene. He was the second person to claim I had a gun in my hand. The kidnapping charge was important too, since it demonstrated that I knew I had committed a crime and was using desperado tactics to escape. Ross had told the grand jury that I had jumped into the back seat of his car and my companion had gotten into the front. At first, he said he had refused to drive us to the corner of 32nd and Chestnut, as we requested, but when I pulled the gun on him, he complied. He testified that I had said to him, I just shot two dudes, and I have kept shooting if my gun hadn't jammed. When a picture of me was shown to him, Ross identified me as the man with the gun. When Jensen put him on the stand on August 12th, he had no reason to suspect that Ross would not repeat all this grand jury testimony. Ross answered his first few questions about where he lived, whether he had owned a car in October 1967, what make it was, etc., etc. But when Jensen asked him where he had been at 5 o'clock on the morning of October 28th, Ross would not tell him. I refused to answer on the grounds it would tend to incriminate me, he said. Jensen could not believe his ears. He asked the court reporter to read the answer back to him, as if to reassure himself of what he had just heard. Ross was a prosecution witness. Moreover, he was a victim, not a defendant, and victims do not take the Fifth Amendment. And when Ross persisted in refusing to answer, Jensen became furious. From his point of view, Ross's insistence on not answering could damage his case seriously and result in bad publicity. It would look as though if something fishy was going on, which of course it was, and put the district attorney's office in an unfavorable light. He appealed to Judge Friedman, asking that the witness he obligated to respond to his questions, pointing out that he had already testified fully on the case before the grand jury 9 months before. At this point, the judge ordered the jury to retire from the courtroom. Ross's lawyer argued that Ross was making a personal claim for his own protection under the Fifth Amendment. He pointed out that questions put to Ross during the trial might well go beyond the factual answers he had given to the grand jury and lead to further questions that would incriminate him. Ross's lawyer suggested that Ross perhaps knew more about what had happened on the morning of October 28th than he had told the grand jury. He was in a dilemma for both. He was a dilemma for both prosecutor and judge. Judge Friedman responded by cutting short the proceedings for that day. The next day, he granted Ross immunity and told him he could not be prosecuted for anything that arose out of his testimony, except perjury or contempt for failing to answer questions directed at him. Now, Ross had to answer Jensen's questions and could no longer invoke the Fifth Amendment. But when the prosecutor began all over again and asked the same question, Ross had refused to answer the previous day when he had been at 5 a.m. on October 28, 1967. Ross again refused to answer on the grounds that it would incriminate him. The judge became totally exacerbated and told him that he must now answer the question since he had immunity. Otherwise, he would go to jail for contempt. Ross just sat there, stoically, refusing to go on. Just as Judge Friedman was preparing to sentence him for contempt, Jensen suddenly realized what he could do with his intransient witness in order to save the day for the prosecution. Mr. Ross, he asked him, do you remember what happened on the morning of October 28, 1967? Ross stalled. Judge Friedman was quick to interject. If you don't remember what happened that morning, he said, why you should say you don't remember. The court does not desire to force you into anything. Is it perhaps that you don't remember what happened that morning? Ross agreed that he couldn't remember. It was incredible to see the way the judge aided Jensen. What they planned to do was clear. The judge chose to point out that a witness cannot be punished for having a faulty memory, and so the prosecution was going to help Ross remember by reading back to him all his grand jury testimony, which ordinarily is never allowed as evidence in a trial.
Child, the fuckery. Um, Charles Gary protested strongly, but Judge Friedman was adamant. Jensen read all of Ross's testimony back to him in front of the jury, and it went into the official record of the trial. Never was Judge Friedman's bias in favor of Jensen more blatantly obvious than his dealings with Del Ross as a witness. It was typical of the arbitrary way the trial was conducted. When their man would not testify because of self-incrimination, they gave him immunity so that anything he said could not be used against him. Then the judge actually coaxed Ross into saying that he could not remember what he had said before the grand jury, so that the prosecution had an excuse to read his testimony into the transcript. On the other hand, when our man, Gene McKinney, refused to testify 12 days later because of self-incrimination, they did not offer him immunity or coax him in any way. They just threw him in jail. The police had already exonerated McKinney of any involvement in the incident, but they still would not offer him immunity to protect himself. This is the only time that the contradiction between justice and what the judge and prosecution were doing came out in open court. Their people got immunity when they knew their testimony would incriminate them. Our people, who had been exonerated but who did not trust the system in any way, got tossed in jail. The whole trial was nothing but a big charade to get me railroaded into the gas chamber. But in all their chicanery, but to get Del Ross's testimony came to nothing in the end because Charles Gary had called the last trump.
Mm.
2 weeks before the trial, he had interviewed Ross in the office and taped the conversation, during the course of which Ross admitted that he had lied to the grand jury. He had gone along with the authorities, he said, because they had warrants out on him for parking violations and he was afraid of them. Ross told Gary in this interview that I did not have a gun that night, that I was barely conscious, and I said nothing at all to him. Of course, when Gary got up to cross-examine him during the trial, Ross could not remember this interview either. So Gary played the whole tape in court over Jensen's vehement objections.
Whoa. As a result, the kidnapping charge against me was dropped for lack of evidence, and I was now being tried on 3 counts instead of 4. Ross's appearance as a witness for the prosecution had been a complete failure, yet he brought back for my second and third trials, and both times he repudiated his position during the first trial. Despite this, I felt no anger toward him. Like Greer, he was a crushed and broken man, pathetically terrified of the power of the state. I felt more angry at the prosecution for using him as a dupe of the state than against Ross, who could not defend himself. Ross was the last important witness that Jensen produced, and after he appeared, the prosecution rested its case. In any trial, the burden of proof lies on the prosecution to establish beyond reasonable doubt the evidence of guilt. Jensen had not achieved this. Many of his accusations were made through implication and innuendo, not facts. Despite his single-minded determination to place me at the scene with the gun in my hand, a lot of his evidence had backfired in ways he had not anticipated. In addition to weaknesses in the testimony of both Greer and Haynes, and the fact that their 2 stories did not jive at crucial points, there were a number of serious flaws and omissions in the prosecutor's case. Jensen never dealt satisfactorily with the shooting, for instance, the location of the 2 9mm casings that were found at the scene by police officers. Jensen has suggested that throughout the trial that these casings, which did not match police guns, belonged to the .38 revolver I allegedly carried that night. The casings were found lying 20 to 25 feet apart, one between the two police vehicles and one near the rear left fender of Haynes's car, right where Frey was shot. Since both Haynes and Greer testimony coincided in stating that Frey and I had walked to the back of Haynes' car and that no shooting had occurred until we reached this point, he could, how could the second casing have gotten 25 feet away? I could not have been in two places at once. This was an insurmountable puzzle in the prosecution argument. The only possible solution seems to be that a third person was firing at the scene, and the prosecution had totally excluded this possibility since it only wanted one assailant, me. Then, too, my lawyers found the police tapes from the morning very mystifying. They carefully went over the transcript of all the police conversations that were recorded between the police cars at the scene and radio dispatch in the police administration building. The tapes began with the request from Officer Fry just after he had stopped me shortly before 5 a.m. The request was for information about me and the car I was driving. They continued through all the communications that took place after other police cars arrived at the scene following the shooting. In analyzing the messages that passed between radio dispatch and the patrol car radios, my lawyer found indications that the police dispatcher in the administration building was sending out information to other police in the Oakland area that was not being radioed in by the police at the scene. This suggested that either the tapes were tampered with or that witnesses were phoning in accounts of the shooting and giving descriptions that the police at the scene did not have. For instance, the dispatcher assumed that I was connected with the crime since Faye had asked information about me before he was shot, and so he sent out a bulletin about 5:15 a.m. describing me as a suspect and stating that I was wearing a tan jacket. Half an hour later, he inexplicably sent out another bulletin that said I was wearing dark clothing. There had been no incoming police radio message on the tape to tell him this, and no indication of how he got his information. How did he learn that I was wearing dark clothing? Henry Grier, too, had mentioned in his interview with Inspector McConnell a Huey type wearing a tan jacket. Was there a third person answering this description at the scene? Throughout the trial, Jensen never allowed the possibility to be suggested to the jury, even though the police had interviewed witnesses who had heard the shots and arrived at the scene seconds after the shooting. My lawyers even suspected that a number of people in the area were close and had witnessed the incident. One woman, a black prostitute, told the police that she had seen three men running away in the direction of the gas station at the corner of 7th Street and Willow Avenue. Another witness, a young man, told the police that he had seen two cars speeding away north of the 7th Street. Jensen never called these people to testify because he wanted to create the impression that I was the only person who could possibly have killed Fry. Yet the accounts of others who were there, and later Haynes' own admission at my third trial that there had been a third person present, contradicted this theory.
Another piece of evidence that Jensen found hard to dismiss was the law book I was carrying when Fry ordered me to the back of Payne's car. Charles Gary pointed out that I could not very well have carried a gun and a law book in my right hand at the same time. But even more crucial was my reason for carrying it. Reading to the police from law books was the only defense I had in a case of unlawful arrest. I had done it countless times in the past, and there were hundreds of black people in the community who had seen me do it and can testify that that was my common practice. I carried it again on the morning of August 28th to read to Officer Fry, and it was an action that Jensen could not distort for his own ends. Perhaps Jensen's most grievous and callous omission during the entire trial was his failure to point out that a vital word in the transcript of Gear's conversation with Inspector McConnell had been changed. It was only by accident that Charles Gary discovered that this word had been incorrectly transcribed by a typist in the district attorney's office from the tape that Inspector McConnell had made with Greer. And yet, this one word was so important that it called into doubt Greer's identification of me from the picture Tim McConnell showed him at the police headquarters. To make matters worse, Gary discovered this error only after the trial was proper over and the jury had been out deliberating for the verdict for the day damn. On September 5th, the jury requested to see the transcripts, and Judge Friedman called Gary and Jensen into his chamber to ask them for a copy. There was no court copy. The trial clerk had forgotten to acquire one as evidence, and Charles Gary had lent his only copy to someone else. So Jensen went to get his and came back with the original working copy of the transcription. As Gary quickly looked through it, he paused in disbelief over a section of Greer's testimony. There, over the crucial word, was handwritten correction, completely reversing the meaning of the sentence. This section read, the question was, about how old? Answer, I can't say because I had only my lights on. I couldn't. I did get a clear picture, clear view of his face, but because he had his head kind of down facing the headlights of the coach, I couldn't get a good look. Over the word did somehow, wait, over the word did, someone had written the correct word didn't. But throughout the trial, Jensen knowing that this issue was crucial, had neglected to inform Gary. So to be clear, the sentence, this is me speaking, not me reading. In the transcript, it said I did get a clear picture, but he's saying that it was handwritten that it said he didn't get a clear picture. But yeah. But throughout the trial, Jensen, knowing this issue was crucial, had neglected to inform Gary, the jury, and the court that there was a question in the transcript of how clearly Greer had been able to see. Indeed, Jensen's contention was that Greer had gotten a good look and therefore was in a position to identify that person as me. As long as there was the slightest doubt in his mind about whether the word did or didn't, he had a moral obligation to inform the court and the defense counsel and it was an absolute matter of conscience that he listen again to the tape to see what the word actually was. He never bothered. In this important matter, and in all the other dubious issues, the position of the bullet casings, the police tapes, the hiding of Greer, the keeping of important witnesses off the stand, the changing of Greer's original testimony, Lowell Jensen proved less than honorable. It is the prosecutor's job to convict a guilty man, not an innocent one. And in my case, Jensen had many reasons to believe I was innocent. He chose to ignore them all. When the prosecution rested its case, Charles Gary, on the morning of August 19th, moved for another mistrial. He based his motion on the fact that it was impossible for me to receive a fair trial in Oakland because of the atmosphere of hatred, violence, and controversy. As proof of this, he read to the court samples of hate mail that he and I had been receiving. One of the letters was from 4 retired Marines who said they had known Frey. The letter stated that neither Gary nor I would be alive in 10 days after the trial was over, no matter what the verdict. Another letter was signed the KKK and read, Nigger lover, I guess you feel that the murdering coon's gonna get off because the jury and witnesses have been all intimidated to the extent that no one dares convict. Why does it sound like Trump supporters today?
Hmm.
The one's always under persecution, child. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
I hope he will be gunned down in the streets by some friends or the poor policeman he killed. The Black Panthers parade all over the place, and I don't see why the KKK and American Nazi parties couldn't do the same. It is
They
supposed
did.
to be country for everybody. Do you want me to finish reading the letter?
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
No, I
Oh,
got it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead and finish the letter, yeah.
It is too bad we ever stopped lynching. Y'all never stopped. And
Okay.
at least at least the damn niggers know their place in those days and didn't cause any trouble. I remember reading about one time they strung up some coons and pulled out pieces. Trigger warning. Really like, I know this is all anti-black, but this is really nasty. So I just want to tell y'all if y'all need to leave and protect yourself. Um, they strung up some coons and pulled out pieces of their flesh with corkscrews. That must have been a lot of fun. I wish that I'd been there to take part in the good work. I hope this race war that we are having starts right away. We outnumber the blacks 10 to 1, so we know who will win. And a lot of damn nigger lovers will be laying right there beside him. I wish Hitler had won and we could have killed off the shinies. And the shinies? The
No, you're right. You're right, Shinies.
shinies, is that Jewish people?
Mm, I think so. Or
Okay.
the people who wear the Shriners hats, I think. I'm not sure.
Okay. And started in on the Coons, the KKK.
Oh, you know, sign to get, you know what? Not a laughing matter. But I was gonna say something because like when you pointed out that they literally sound like Trump supporters, and then like all the crackers who like victimize themselves and shit, they're like, I bet the jury was rigged against us and the system is against us. Meanwhile, the whole system is white supremacy. Is literally you're on its side. You're on the same team. Like, what are you talking about? It's just delusional. I hate it. Fucking cult. Gary's well, terrorist group. Gary's request for a mistrial was denied by Judge Friedman, who refused to acknowledge that I was receiving anything but a fair trial. He felt the letters were negligible and unimportant. After this, Gary opened the defense and began on the morning of August 19th to show the jury where the truth lay. He introduced a group of witnesses who were essential to to those political aspects of the case and that we had been so determined to explore from the beginning. These were people from the Black community, ordinary, honest, hardworking people who could testify with sincerity and conviction about how their lives were frequently made difficult by the occupying army of racist police. These people described being stopped, questioned, bullied, pushed around, and insulted for no reason other than the sadistic whim of some Southern cracker who hated blacks.
Hey, Pen.
Yo, huh?
So I just wanted to let you know that I don't think there's like a stopping chapter here. It's been an hour. So,
Okay.
yeah, just let me know how you feel because we could stop here and then the next space would be about the defense, but it's up to you.
Yeah, I'll finish this page off and yeah, we can start on the next one on the next space tomorrow. Appreciate you.
Sounds good.
My bad, I lost my place. Oh, okay. Uh, these people described being stopped, questioned, bullied, pushed around, and assaulted for no reason other than a sadistic whim of some Southern cracker who hated blacks. I was gonna say too, that's crazy because like literally today, while I was helping some people out, we were trading back police brutality stories that directly happened to us, like as though we were talking about I don't know a sports game or something. It was sick, but it was like a bonding moment. It was crazy, but a lot of these things that he described, we all still go through today. These were the people brutalized by intruders in their own community. All had one thing in common: encounters with Officer John Fry. Daniel King, 16, related on the stand how he had met Fry around 4 o'clock one morning in West Oakland, where he was visiting his sister. They had gone out to get something to eat on 7th Street, and there, incredibly enough, had encountered a white man with no pants on. He was with Fry. Fry told King he was violating curfew, and the white man accused him of knowing the girl who had taken his pants. When King denied this, both Fry and the white man called him nigger, pimp, and other dirty words. Fry had held King while the white man hit him. Then he put him in a paddy wagon and took him to juvenile hall where he spent the rest of the night. Fry did not even bother to call King's parents. Okay.
Oh, these motherfucker like this was a hard chapter.
For real.
Like just witnessing the charade of it all is like really crazy. But
But it's really important too that we read things like this to remind us because we still have people today that still believe in the justice system. And we're like, why? We have way too much evidence, too many stories, too many personal stories, and stories like this written down for us so that we can learn from. So, like, no, it is all a charade. There is no justice under white supremacy capitalism. It doesn't exist. And I like when we read things like this.
The crazy thing is, think about how many people their stories never got written or told about,
There you go.
and the worst shit that's happened. You know,
There you go. And are locked up. And then there's this whole campaign of us viewing those who get locked up as inherently criminal, as though the system isn't criminal. And then when it's happening, we justify them being locked up. And then you'll even have other people, usually the petty bourgeois, who then like campaign for stricter, tough on crime laws and getting the thugs out of here. All the time. That's why we say when you are not a prison abolitionist, you are aligning with the state. They there was a document, and I want to say by the CIA. I'm going to get this brother's podcast and see if I can put it in a jumbo. I'll retweet it. But he talks about how it was written that they called them like shit concentration warfare camps. because they understood that the purpose of calling them that, because they started restructuring prisons after like the rise of like the Black Panthers, Deacons of Self-Defense, all these radical revolutionaries and people who were going to jail were radicalizing people behind bars. So they understood like, oh no, we need to work with the petty bourgeois, psychologists, teachers, nurses and doctors and all kinds of shit to break the spirit of these people behind bars so that they will not be a threat behind bars or when they get out. And so, yeah, we understand that that's how prisons functions. Then we no longer follow the propaganda. We don't look at every cop as Olivia Benson and Detective Stabler shit. We understand exactly what that serves and what that's for, and that's to indoctrinate us into allowing them to keep kidnapping us and putting us in these warfare camps to be broken. So yeah. I wanted to post something to y'all, and I'll probably do this. Me and Choose were talking about it after every reading. Would y'all want to do a book discussion on a recorded space like right after so that people can, who don't get to come to the space or might listen to it later, get to hear the discussion? Or would people prefer a separate space that's not recorded where you can discuss like the book and expand on things? And I don't know how we want to do that. If we want to put like a thumbs up for discussion now or a thumbs down for like not recorded, or
Yeah.
we rather have, yeah.
Yeah, I guess if you wanted to say anything, you could just grab a mic, and then when you're up here, you could tell us like how you feel. But also sometimes like folks are not in a mood to discuss. So if you don't grab a mic, then we just assume that you're here with us, and maybe you can't grab it for whatever reason. But we'll just end the space too if no one requests. But also know there's never any pressure to be on the mic when you're in this space, because we know that some people is cooking, some people is chilling. So this is not a place that you have to come perform any labor. We have to do that in every other part of our life, and so here you can just exist if that's what you choose to do.
Absolutely.
My chicken's golden right now. I
Yeah.
want to help y'all. I had to cook me some food.
I'm glad you're eating, and I hope you get better, comrade. For real.
I'm trying. Man, that shit hit me out of nowhere. I woke
Mm.
up and I'm just like, what the fuck? My head's all fucked up. My sinuses all messed up. I feel like I'm swimming through like fog right now.
Oh no. No, I'll definitely talk to ancestors for you, bro. Heal soon. Oh, Ginger.
Yo,
Shaheed got me on that, man, and I was breathing like, for real, I could smell like 1,000 miles away, bro. It was crazy. But nah,
you said ginger?
yo, Ginger, I'm telling you, just chew on that, and just all of a sudden, like, I don't know, your lungs open up and your nostrils all widen and shit. It's crazy. Or make a ginger tea too. You can do that with honey. But
Cool.
right, I'll go ahead and end the space on that note. Y'all take care. And yeah, thanks for coming. And we'll post when the next space is. And let's get free.
See y'all.